Hi, welcome to the Mistwood Publishing Book Club. I am your host, S.R. Mowry, and today we'll be looking at my book, The Veil of Stars, Chapter 11, Winds of Winter. So this chapter is probably one of the most integral chapters for Talia and Narbad. It's a pretty big moment for them, but the chapter actually starts with Karam and Is, and we're kind of reminded of their distrust of each other and how their alliance is pretty tenuous. It's not very secure. They don't necessarily like each other. It's just, as villains typically are, they're kind of both plotting their own agendas while working together. And so we kind of get an update on that, kind of see that going on. And then the next section we have, Narbad. Since Narbad and Talia are together, that storyline, continues through for the rest of the book. And so we start off with Talia kind of offering to take some of the physical load that Narbad is burdened with, since he has to carry most of their luggage, for lack of a better term. And he hesitantly agrees, and then they kind of have a conversation with Eileen and kind of discuss, Narbad is kind of blunt, and that he is, Eileen's like, I'm not sure what came over me, and Narbad's just like, fear. I've seen it before. It happens to us all. You need not worry about it so long as you learn to overcome it. And so we've kind of been established with Eileen's arc, and that he is this great warrior from the academy who was top of his class, but, as soon as he gets into real danger, real battle, he cripples. He's crippled by fear. He fears death. He fears not being able to see his wife again, and that inspiration is largely comes from this movie called K-19 that I watched as a kid, weirdly enough, even though it's rated R. And it kind of, that character who, the first introduction we have to him is he's kissing his girlfriend goodbye before going off on this submarine, and I think it's the Cold War. And things go wrong on the submarine, and he's the guy that's supposed to do this job dealing with radiation, and his fear of dying and not seeing his wife again leads him to not go in, and somebody else goes in his stead, and that person or people die, and then, towards the end of the movie, he, finds his courage, and he kind of goes in there, and it does kill him, so that's kind of the inspiration of generally of kind of Eileen's story. I'm not saying that's where I take his arc. That was kind of what inspired his character, because that was a really compelling, although it's a horribly depressing, I thought that it was really a well done story. I didn't really appreciate it as a kid, but it did stick with me because of how much it disturbed me. And as my favorite comic book writer, well, one of my favorite comic book writers says, Scott Snyder, he says, write what scares you. And so Eileen is very much so tapping into fear that I had growing up as a kid. Anytime I watch a war movie, that basically what Eileen is dealing with is what I think about. If I was, ever drafted or whatever, like, that would be my fear, is that I would be so afraid to die and not see my wife again, or, if I was in high school, my future wife, or I would die before I met her, that my fear of that would get other people killed, and that I would be labeled kind of like a coward. which is kind of what we see Narbad pretty much saying to Elling in this bit of dialogue there. So whenever I'm writing Elling, I'm really kind of tapping into, okay, well, if I was ever put, like realistically, if it was me put on some big quest, you know, and fear, I mean, I don't know what I would do because it's probably not going to happen. You know, I've reached the age where that's probably not going to happen to me. But, you know, you still wonder that about yourself. You know, what would you do if you were in one of these situations where your life is on the line at any given moment, and you know, you have a loved one that you want to get back to, and how would you react to that, and how would you handle that, and would the fear make you a coward, and could you overcome that? And so that's kind of, you know, this chapter has set up kind of Elling's arc, and, you know, how's he going to, you know, what's he going to be able to do? Will he ever be able to overcome that fear? You know, will he ever be able, you know, will, you know, if he does overcome that fear, will it destroy him? And is that ultimately good or bad? And, you know, what's more important, him getting back to his loved one, or, you know, the success of the mission? And so it's just a very interesting character kind of arc to put on on an elf character for sure. So that's kind of what's being set up with, you know, kind of that conversation. We've kind of fully met Elling at this point. He's kind of established as, you know, when Ruth picked him to be, you know, he picked him because he was the top of his class at the military school for elves in, you know, the Immortal Forest. And so the fact that he's not what he was supposed to be, you know, there's a lot of pressure on him. It's a bit, I don't know, I think it's a very interesting character and character arc to put on. It kind of adds to the companions, I think, in a really nice way. So then we kind of hear, you know, at the end of that section that the ice is cracking, and we do find that Talia ends up falling in, and Narbad ends up going in and saving her. And this is actually a section of the book that was not originally in the story in the chapter. You know, this chapter didn't have that section there. I added in there because an editor was like, well, we're not really, like, when is the moment that Talia realizes that Narbad is what she's been wanting? That he is somebody that she needs, and he also needs her. And that's this chapter. In this chapter, you know, it's pretty well established why Narbad needs Talia, but I needed a moment from Talia's perspective to help kind of have that moment where she realizes, oh, this is the knight in shining armor, or at this point kind of rusty armor, that I was looking for. You know, I was looking for, you know, the Boy Scout knight in shining armor, and lo and behold, here he is. You know, I need him not just for physical rescue, but, you know, as we find in this chapter, also they need each other emotionally. And so in this chapter you kind of see it click, and I think both of their heads, although they're not openly discussing it. You know, this is the chapter where their friendship is cemented, and also the chance of it being something more is birthed. So, you know, that chapter ends, you know, she felt the tightening of his muscled arms as he lifted her and carried her from the lake, dangling limply in his arms. She watched the water drip from her hair. The orc gently directed her damp head to his chest, and she felt warm and sheltered. Narbad carried her this way for many hours, traversing snow, boulders, and trees, and Talia felt needed, she felt cherished, and she felt loved, which is ultimately what she wanted. You know, when she was in her little bath before leaving the immortal, you know, Grendel, that's pretty much what she said she wanted. And so in this chapter, the next part, they have a conversation, and it's kind of both of them kind of coming to that realization of we are friends, and although they're not saying it to each other, they're not realizing that the other feels this way. Maybe they're starting to feel feelings for each other that are not platonic. And so we kind of see that beginning here. And, one of the more heart-touching moments is Narbad explaining the difference between Talia and Eileen, in that Eileen has all of the training, but he doesn't have the courage. And Narbad saying training, swordplay can be taught. Courage can't. And so he's kind of given her hope and helped her realize that, you have purpose in this companionship, and you have the potential to be ultimately a better warrior than Eileen if you really wanted to be. And he actually also offers to help train her. So it's a pretty big moment for their friendship, and, kind of them again coming to realize, well, maybe, it's not explicitly said, but they're thinking, maybe, they're maybe not even really thinking it, it's just that those romantic feelings are maybe starting to pop up. The next section we have them kind of wandering through the cold, and we have a conversation with, looks like Tima, Narbad, Talia, Lenod, kind of the whole pack, where they're kind of talking to Lenod about, can you use your warming prayers, spells to keep us warm? And, he's like, well, we need to keep them. Talia's like freezing to death, so Narbad's going to carry her. Basically, at the beginning of the chapter, you kind of see that he's gonna lean hard on them. And if you're picking up on that this storm is not natural, that is affecting the weather, you are picking up correctly. He is affecting the weather. He is basically hurting them where he wants them to go with the storm. So they end up finding a cave, and it gets pretty rough before they get there. A few companions are unable to, they have to be carried or almost carried, and when they get there, Narbad collapses. Next, we're met with Narbad kind of waking up, and Ruth is talking to him, and Ruth kind of reminds him, this is your place, and your place isn't, good. He says, you orc are a slave. I appreciate your care for my sister, I do, but it goes no further than that. Know and understand your position in this company. Do not dare to have hope where there is none. Saving her life will not change that. Your sky is dark. No stars shine for you. In other words, you're wrong, Narbad argued, Ruth's face wrinkled with rage at the disrespectful words. My sky is filled with stars, the orc retorted bitterly, his jaw tight. Ruth calmly placed his hand upon the dagger at his side. Full of stars with no way to reach them, Narbad continued. And that kind of really does articulate how Narbad feels, where he is in his faith right now. Basically saying, there are, Talia has shown me that stars are out there. There's a veil covering them because I'm an orc. And so they're there taunting me, but I can't reach them because I'm an orc. And, he's basically saying, I recognize that there is hope out there for me, but I'll never have it because I'm an orc. And because I'm an orc, I'll always be a slave. I'll always be treated as lesser than, and I'll always be mistreated, and because of that, I can't really reach the stars that I could if I was, like, say, an elf. And so, although I think a lot of people in our culture kind of have that mentality, systematic, whatever, and I don't necessarily agree that that's true. I'm not saying it's untrue, but I think it's greatly exaggerated. I think in Narbad's case, however, is pretty undeniable. Like, he is actually a slave currently, not generations and generations in the past. So, that's kind of where he is. I think and again, orcs are not symbolic of African slaves at all whatsoever. I have black people in my books, so it's not allegorical at all. All throughout human history on this earth, we've had slaves of all races. Any human that's a slave probably has felt something akin to those emotions. So it's not meant to be some big political statement. It's just, I'm just writing a fancy book, right? Book. So that's kind of where we leave it, except that it's pretty clear that they're about to be attacked. We're about to have a battle. So chapter 12, Knowing Your Enemy, definitely covers a battle. And I will cover that chapter next week. I will see you then. Have a good one.